What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Today we are talking about Season 2, Episode 20, The Maquis, Part 1. How's it going, Mike?
It's going good, man. My coffee has gone cold, Keith, from all the futzing, the time took futzing. But listen, it's what we do. It's who we are.
The futzing? I have exactly this much futzing left this week. So when we do toys,
I know.
No futzing.
I think I'm not going to say those words out loud, actually. So we'd like to thank our new sponsors. The Saudis have sent us a drum of blood money oil to instead of their $3 Patreon payment. But regardless, we thank them. And thankfully, we aren't having children, Keith, because they wanted our firstborn.
Yeah, well, fair enough. Yes, well, that is such a deep cut. Even I only half understand it, but here we are, nonetheless, talking about Deep Space Nine. We had such a great episode last week, and we are now doing the first two-parter of Deep Space Nine. Very excited. We had sort of a three-parter with the Circle trilogy to begin Season 2, but it wasn't properly a Part 1, Part 2.
For the first time ever this week, Keith, I always read the Deep Space Nine companion after I watch the episode because I want to avoid any sort of spoiler buzz. And this is the first week where I read it, and it actually took the episode down a few pegs, in my opinion, because of it.
Interesting.
And we'll get to that when we get there, because I was chalking up some of my, not distaste, some of my quibbles because of first part of a two-parter. Table setting. But I found out, and we'll all find out, that there was a little bit more table setting than I had thought, and I didn't like that choice. I understand it, but doesn't mean I gotta like it, Keith. It reminds me very much of some of the problems with seasons 7, 8 of The Practice that we talked about before. But we'll get there. We'll get to all that.
We will talk all about it. But first, before we talk about anything, we have to talk about our patrons at patreon.com/KNM. And they are, at this exact moment, Brian Kaufman, Casey Clark, Cloudlover69, Jason Moe, Andrew Hayes, Jorge Navoa, and the mysterious Worf's Boot Shift CRM Productions, Charles Babbage, Nikolai Ivanovich Lobachevsky, at Grim Toys, Delusions at Noon, and Eric Wilson. Mike, what are they getting at this particular moment?
Our friends at patreon.com/KNM, they get all kinds of goodies. Have you noticed on the YouTube, we've been playing that video game, Keith? People seem to enjoy our misery, and the patrons are getting it first. In fact, they already have Part 3. It's sitting in their feeds already.
Part 3, the drunken musical.
Which is, we've set a bar that I'm not sure we have that effort level every time. But hey.
We absolutely legitimately, if you haven't seen it, because you haven't, well, who knows when you're actually watching this video, we improvise an entire musical while we're stalling for the stupid pixels to go beep, 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 beep.
I had way more fun than I had hoped.
So stupid.
They get that. They get other unboxings. In fact, I'm about to dig into my Christmas toys and record those for all of our patrons, with or without Keith, goddammit. But also, you get to watch me watch Deep Space Nine. There's been some really lovely comments on the channel that I have to say, in a moment of vulnerability, have meant a lot to me, because I wasn't clear how many people thought they would hate my reactions to this show because I'd never watched it before. But thus far, the feedback has been that people have come to treasure me watching this with fresh eyes, and that means a lot to me. The kind words have meant a lot to me. You sharing those kind words has meant a lot to me. Even more, I watch every episode. My first virgin watch of each episode happens on the Patreon feed. And you can watch along with me, skirting the very boundaries of legality. And people have been the patrons are watching. I was unsure if I was just in a void, providing content that no one was watching, but they have been commenting, Keith. They are watching with me. I appreciate it. It's such a fun little community, folks. Get on board. Patreon.com/KNM.
Yes, indeed. All right. Well, I think it's time to talk about the Maquis Part 1. which aired on April 24th, 1994. We had another couple of weeks off between the previous episode and this one. And our top song, speaking of problematic, the even more problematic than necessarily are, being bought by the Saudis, it is Bump and Grind by R. Kelly.
Oh, no.
So...
that's on me?
It's always on you. You have a lot of ethical decisions to make right now, buddy.
It's time to bump and grind behind those prison bars where I belong, 'cause I'm a terrible garbage human. Ooh, ooh,
Wow.
Ooh, ooh, don't drop the soap.
Wow, that was...
Can I put
We're
that
off
on the
to a
internet,
very
Keith?
problematic episode so far.
Come on, you can't tell me that R. Kelly doesn't deserve that.
1,000,000%
Okay.
deserves all of it. So the top movie was Bad Girls,
Ooh.
which I don't necessarily remember, but there's an interesting piece of trivial trivia about it that's nothing to do with Star Trek. Andie MacDowell was the first woman to be in the #1 movie twice in a row in different movies, because last week's #1 movie was 4 Weddings and a Funeral. So Andie MacDowell having a moment here in April of 1994 before she blows up Les Moonves on The Practice. Just
you
a
can watch
couple
us
of
talk
years
about that
later.
too. Go check out your podcast feeds.
We have a lot of feelings about that. But do we have any feelings about what was on TV tonight?
A couple of things worth mentioning, Keith. Of course, for those of us who are watching on Sunday, as is the date that Keith gave us, we had Mike's favorite cops and the double block. This is Sunday. Excuse me, the Sunday block. On Fox, we had a special, Keith. It was called Fox on Ice, which I can only imagine was like ice capades of Fox properties, which
Of car crashes and like
wish
a
we had
bear
a YouTube of that.
person when ice skaters attack.
But the Sunday night movie on NBC, Keith, was The Sound of Music, a classic. But do you know what the lead-in to The Sound of Music was? They were trying out a prime time version of Barney and Friends at 7 p.m. Barney must have been so huge at this point, because remember when Barney first came out, it was blowing up.
No, Barney is giant, but at 7? Because if you're a 3-year-old, you're usually in bed before 7.
Yeah, but maybe Sunday night movies, they were thought would be more kids, so they were doing a lead-in.
Well, kids, but if you're gonna stay up to watch Sound of Music, you're not 4. You're 8. You're 9. You're 10.
Yeah, I hear you. And then if you were watching in the Saturday market, guys, Saturday nights, 8 p.m., great NBC block. We had Blossom coming in at 8 p.m. Remember Blossom, Mayim Bialik, way before the Jeopardy days. The Mommies
Didn't get NBC
at 8:30, which I do not remember that show. Do you remember The Mommies?
We did not get NBC up in Vermont at that point.
Then one of my faves, Empty Nest, which was a spin-off of what popular show?
Again, for the third time,
Golden
did not
Girls.
get NBC.
The Golden Girls. But Keith, most importantly, do you know what the ABC Saturday Night at the Movies was?
I do
Star
not.
Trek 4: The Voyage Home.
Oh, good one.
That's what the whales,
Good
right?
one. Yeah, it's the Wales one.
Wow, Mike knew that somehow.
Wow. All right. Well, that one's worth staying up for.
Yeah.
I would 1,000,000 times stay up for that.
That was my best whale.
Well, I'm looking
We
forward.
don't want your blood money.
So no, that's going to end up on the soundboard. If your whale call doesn't end up on the soundboard,
Keith, at least harmonize with my whale, and then I'll put that on the soundboard. Ready? 3, 2.
that was me not doing it.
Yeah. Thanks. Only one of us is canceled.
Wow. Okay, let's move on.
Next week, Mike watches Deep Space Nine is just a chair.
That's right. Keith quits. All right. But luckily, enough with the shenanigans. Let's get to what's important this week. and that is the weekly world news headline. And the headline this week, big news. Yeah, stay tuned. Satan speaks from erupting volcano with an amazing graphic.
What's he saying?
That actually sounded more like a
Mount.
Nobody knows.
I know. I love our inside deep cuts.
Yeah. So there's a lot going on. It's so funny. Like they had like Barney on and like Blossom on when Satan's talking from a volcano. You think they might have some live coverage of that, but no, that's just what happens.
I mean, Barney's got a Satan vibe about him.
For sure. For sure.
We're
All right. So
friends should be.
I don't know what to say about any of that. So here we are talking about Deep Space Nine.
You love me. We're a happy family.
Mike has had his coffee and Keith's still waking up. We're doing this at noon.
This episode should be over soon. Okay.
It will not be.
Nope.
Amazing. Okay, so the Maquis Part 1, Season 2, Episode 20 was directed by veteran director David Livingston, who last directed Playing God. And it was written by James Cocker, who last wrote on Paradise. Ooh, thank you for my coffee.
Oh, look who's getting treated today.
Yeah, that's right. The teleplay by James Cocker, who last wrote Last Paradise and has a story by Rick Berman, Michael Peller, Jerry Taylor, and James Crocker. So they brought in all the big guns for this, the showrunners for this and the upcoming showrunners for Star Trek Voyager, because guess what? This is the beginning of dropping the breadcrumbs for Star Trek Voyager.
Mike
which
doesn't
we
know if he loves that.
We're going to start talking about it in a little segment we call... Now, Keith, waste your time with trivial trivia.
Bing.
Okay, so the reference to the Badlands and losing ships is a setup for Star Trek Voyager, which was already deep in pre-production and which premiered a year later, as is the introduction of the Maquis. And the Maquis, of course, are named for the French resistance during the Nazi occupation of France. So the Maquis settlement is a reuse of the set from the Next Generation episode Ensigns of Command. And lastly, because I have a feeling we're going to talk a lot about the Voyager setups, I'll just get this out. Eagle-eyed viewers might notice that when Dukat and Sisko enter the promenade, Dukat is full-on having a wardrobe malfunction well before the Super Bowl. He's got that armor sort of in the front, and half of it was unbuckled, so it was sort of flapping in the breeze while they were having that scene, which does not seem very Dukatish to me. So, Mike, why don't you pull out your information from a certain place, and we can talk about the setup of it all.
Yes, in a little segment we call Deep Space Nine, Star Trek Companion. We want to learn behind the scenes.
Okay.
Although the Maquis Parts 1 and 2 hold up on their own as strong, dramatic stories spiced with some good action sequences, the whole reason d'entrée was to lay some necessary groundwork for new series about to be launched, Star Trek Voyager. Boo. Don't take up my time with your Voyager crap.
Well,
we knew that we wanted to include a renegade element in Voyager. and that show would involve a ship housing both Starfleet people and the idealistic freedom fighters that the Federation felt were outlaws, explains Jerry Taylor. So in order to avoid having some burdensome backstory and exposition in Voyager's pilot, we decided we could plant the idea of the Maquis in shows that were already on the air. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Directing a piece of a multi-part episode, not to mention a piece intended to set up a separate television series, can be a frustrating task, observes Livingston. It was tough because it's a setup show. You know you're going in and you're not going to get all the goodies. You have to do all the work, all the exposition, all the character introduction, so it lacks something on its own. You can't really pay off anything you set up, because that's going to happen in the next part. The second hour is going to get all the action. I got very little action, although I did get dull Dukat to hit somebody. Another big piece. Nana and Terry are great together, Livingston enthusiastically states, especially when they're discussing sexual stuff, because although it's two women talking, it always ends up kind of bizarre. Kira's kind of macho, a very masculine kind of woman in a military uniform, who has a sexual side, but most of the time is running around acting really rigid, and Dax has been both a man and a woman several times, so the dynamics between the two are a lot more interesting than just two women talking. I agree with that. But yeah. Keith, here's something I really think adds some color. At the top of Act 5, Sisko and Starfleet representative is talking via a comm in his office. They can't hear what he's saying, but the heated tone of the conversation is obvious. In fact, a scene was filmed and later cut in which Sisko follows up on the close conversation by picking up his desk monitor and throwing it on the floor. What was he so steamed about? Keith, here's the actual dialogue Sisko is having with the Admiral on the other side of the monitor. We neither hear the dialogue nor see the Admiral on the monitor. We do see Sisko trying to keep his temper while emphatically responding to the inquiries. Here we go. I'm going to do it in character. Sisko.
Oh, okay.
No, I'm not. Sisko, I'm hoping...
You know, if the Deep Space Nine companion that you had mailed to me, like, I don't know, 6 days ago, had arrived...
It actually was placed in the mail yesterday, Keith, but you'll know that was a national holiday, so it's actually going out today.
So, because we'd be able to read this together.
Taking time. Sisko says, bristling, I'm hoping I don't have to remind the Admiral how many people pass through here during a week's time. It's not possible to keep tabs on every single person while they're on the station, Admiral. If I didn't know you better, Commander, I'd think you were just making excuses. Sisko, heatedly, I'm not making excuses. Would it be in keeping with Federation policy to frisk everyone who steps through our airlocks? To search through every room of every visitor during their stay? Admiral, of course not. But with 2 kidnappings and a ship being destroyed, all in less than a week's time, obviously your security measures leave something to be desired. Sisko, security on this station is by the book. Our security program and the officers who work in it are first rate. Admiral, then what were they doing when all of this was happening? We here at Starfleet are watching how you resolve this situation very closely, Commander. We think it might be prudent to replace this chief of security you have. Sisko, Odo is both highly intelligent and extremely thorough. He's the most qualified person I have for the job. Admiral, still it would be a concrete example that you are taking active measures to resolve this situation, Admiral, or Captain, Commander, and to make sure it doesn't happen again. I stand behind my chief of security 100%. That may be a mistake, Commander. Then it's my mistake. Then let me make my point again. Starfleet is very unhappy that this happened. We want this matter taken care of immediately. I don't have to remind you how this reflects on your position. We are doing everything we can to apprehend the kidnappers. Don't bother me with details. Just clean up the mess, Commander, and quickly, before this becomes a permanent stain on your record. Do I make myself clear? Yes, sir. The Admiral image disappears from the monitor. Then we pick up in his office. Sisko drops his head.
Interesting.
Wow. That's a lot of stakes there.
I think at least some of that would have been really helpful to have to add stakes for Sisko, to see why he's really on the edge and having to pretend that he's not on the edge for Dukat and so on and so forth. I feel like I don't think we needed all of that, but I think a lot of that.
I feel like we get
helpful.
it in the scene where Odo's defending himself to the crew, but Sisko having his back there, I think, is actually something that would have been helpful.
Yeah, I mean that was like a page and a half. I think we could have used a half page, but I think that would have been really helpful. Interesting. All right. Well, we're going to talk much more about all of it a little bit later when we get into the episode. But before we do that, we have to talk about what was Next Gen doing. Next Gen was airing Firstborn, in which Alexander sends himself back in time to tell his child self, toughen up a little bit, be a warrior. And it's an interesting episode. Like, what if you could send yourself back in time to give yourself some advice? So there it is. Alexander, man, they just never gave up on pushing that character on us. All right, so the guest stars for this episode include Tony Plana as Amoros, Bertilla Damas as Sakona, who also did 2 characters on Voyager, Richard Poe back as Gulavec, Michael A. Kravik as William Samuels, who also did 1 episode of Voyager and 2 of Enterprise, of course, Mark Arlimo as Gul Dukat, and Bernie Casey here as Calvin Hudson. I think it's time.
Well, Keith, it would be time. However, I think it's important to discuss that I have to get us the screenshots properly. But you know what? I'll do that just in real time because there's no time to mess around. You know what I mean?
There's no time.
Family.
I'm so tiny.
You are so tiny. Mike, are you shrinking?
There we go. Is that better? That looks like me. Hey,
Yeah, that looks a little better. Yeah.
Okay, great.
Mike.
Weekly screens.
I have opinions about Deep Space Nine. I'm stalling for time because I didn't do the screenshots yet.
I did them. I just forgot to put them in there. Add directory. Where did I put them though, Keith? That's a big question here.
They're in the Dropbox where they always are, aren't they?
I know, but I weekly screens. Oh no.
Oh no, I need to count my time. There we go.
Does that feel right?
Yeah, there
Okay,
it is.
Great.
Well done. Okay, well, this episode is off the rails, surprisingly, because we've never been off the rails before.
I was about to say it's Monday, but it is not. In fact,
It's Tuesday.
Yeah.
That's true. Well, here we are in our teaser, and there's a fancy Cardassian freighter docked at Deep Space Nine. And after some Cardassians board carrying tubes of some sort, a nameless bald Federation officer opens a panel.
Why you gotta bald shame him?
I have to somehow distinguish him.
There's a picture.
A lot of people do audio here. Okay, so
He's hair challenged.
completely uninteresting white dude walks by. Random white comes in with a nameless bald. However he identifies, he opens a panel and starts doing something to the ship. Then we head to Ops, and Kira is teasing Dax about going on a date with Captain Baudet, who was a Galamite. And Galamites, of course, everybody knows, have transparent skulls, so you can literally see their brains.
But she does enforce that she's in it for his mind, Keith, not his Baudet.
Wow. Okay, fair enough. Kira is kind of judgy about it, and about the looks. And Dax, there you go. That's
Timing.
timing. You know what comedy is? Timing.
Patreon.com/K&M if you want to support this.
Kay wants to go home. All right, so anyway, Dax puts her in place. Says, why you being so judgy about appearance? But we also hear that Dax dates Ferengis. That's interesting. Which I'm sitting here thinking, maybe I got a shot. She dates Ferengis. I mean, I don't know. Maybe that's my first window. Then after all of that Cardassian transport ship heads off, and then boom, it full on explodes. And that is the end of our teaser.
And then Kira quips, I guess the date's off?
Yeah, something like that.
So the guy she was going to go out with just blew up.
No. Baudet was not on that ship.
Oh.
No. Captain Baudet is a Federation officer. This is a Kardashian.
Is that the guy who comes in and he's Ben's buddy?
No. Did he have a transparent skull?
Oh, yeah, you're right. Why didn't we get to see him? Do we get to see him eventually? Because that's cool. Transparent skull.
I'm not going to spoil it.
Okay. That's a
I'm
yes.
not going to spoil it, but we will hear more of Baudet in the future. The bodacious Baudet.
Bodie.
So in Act 1, O'Brien and Kira are scanning the wreckage looking for why the ship blew up. Sisko is impatient, and we hear that all the Bajoran outposts are being put on alert for reprisals from the Cardassians. And everybody sort of doubts immediately that it was an accident. Then O'Brien finds some mercassium in the wreckage, and it shouldn't be there because mercassium is Federation tech, and it's classified. They don't share it with anybody. Then Dax, of course, figures out it wasn't an explosion, but an implosion. And that means it was not an accident. So we've got some sort of a, boom. Then a Federation commander, Calvin Hudson, shows up. And he's wearing the old Next Generation style uniforms because that's what they wore on Federation ships still at this point, as they were on Next Gen. So we find out, is old buddies with Sisko and Dax, because Dax is old buddies with literally everybody that walks on the station. And we also find out that he is in charge of the Federation colonies in the demilitarized zone. So, guys, it is time to pick up your exposition shovel because we are about to explain a lot.
For those of you watching on the YouTube, good example of, here comes a new character.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have any lines, so make a choice as to what you think of this character and give me a face.
Oh, that's great. 100%. Dax is like, oh, it's my old buddy. And Odo's like, no. Don't trust you. Don't trust you for a second.
Well, who's right?
Well, Odo's instincts, very, very good. But before they get too far into the exposition, he asks if Sisko and Dax are hooking up. And, Sisko says, nope, that would be strange. But it makes me wonder, though, because, I wonder how strange it would be in that situation. I mean, I guess it would be if you knew somebody before, but if we take the analogy all the way through, though, right? So your old buddy transitions, and now your old buddy is hot, and you have a friendship there. I don't know, why not?
Well, I think if you want to really,
I guess it depends on what the relationship was.
Yeah, and you guys probably. Okay, so let me adjust. I'm not saying it would change this. I'm just saying if I was to adjust the analogy slightly, your old buddy transitioned back and forth a bunch of times. Because right, and also your relationship with them was based a lot on some womanizing and your college years. You know what I mean? So that would be an adjustment. That would be an adjustment.
Right.
Not saying it's not possible, but it would be strange. I think that it
would.
Strange is a good word.
Yeah, but not necessarily off the table. I mean, I could see that happening. Anyway,
it's 2023. Maybe nothing's off the table.
Yeah, I mean they like each other. I mean they're both single and good looking and ready to mingle. So whatever. So we continue.
Send your fan fiction to lookatmystartrektoys@gmail.com.
Yeah. Please don't.
Don't do that. There's only room for Keith's fan fiction.
Ooh, do not involve. If you're gonna write slash fiction, by all means, write me into it. Don't send it to me. All right, so send it to my. Yeah, but you know what the slash fiction's gonna be about, buddy. Anyway, so let's move forward. We find out that both Sisko and Hudson have dead wives and dark backstories. And Hudson is very concerned about the Federation colonies that were established before the treaty with Cardassia that shifted the borders, putting them then into Cardassian space and not Federation territory. And Hudson thinks the treaty screwed them because the Cardassians won't protect them. Okay, so huge exposition dump here. Did you follow what was happening, what all this was about?
You know, it's interesting you asked me that question because normally when exposition comes this hot and heavy, it's funny, we were talking about this with The Last of Us the other night. I start to glaze over a little bit, and I'm just like, this can't possibly be that interesting, like that important. Like I'll get enough from context from the rest of the episode. Like I don't need each individual nuance bit. But this time I actually tried really hard to keep up with it because I know how important the political machinations are generally on these plot lines. And I think that I did myself a disservice because it really confused me a lot, even though it's because clearly. But what I did get the major swabs, and I don't know if it's the performance. Somebody mentioned it on our Mike Watches Deep Space Nine, and I felt the same way. This actor's name?
This actor is Bernie Casey.
I felt like he was either a little checked out or trying a little too hard to play the different layers of his what he's hiding versus what he, like he's clearly got some espionage type things happening.
He's playing a couple of different games at the same time.
And I couldn't tell, it felt his performance felt muddied, and I wasn't I'm glad to hear I wasn't the only person who felt that way, but it did not help make things clear in this moment. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I didn't have any problem with Casey's performance. I think, looking back, we'll talk about it at the end, but this whole storyline, which is so important, like, who are the Maquis and the Resistance, that kind of stuff. I think the sort of motivations for all of it are a little muddy. Exactly what happened is a little bit muddy. And I've never quite resonated with this storyline as much as I think they wanted me to, because it's the treaty of it all, and like, the who betrayed who and who had the chance to leave and not leave and blah 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 blah. It gets a little bit. I don't know. Like I'm not quite sure. We're intentionally put in a position where it's a little bit difficult to take to know what side to take, right? But I think,
well, the view. See, we're getting into the end of the episode.
You know what? Let's save it.
I gotta take a note though because I want to make that point. Okay, move on.
All right. So Sisko says the Federation is worried that the bombing is going to risk the treaty, and Hudson says they won't risk the treaty with the Cardassians. Won't risk the treaty with the Federation, but Bajor should look out, which is important here, right? Because the Federation and the Cardassians are one thing, and they both have this treaty. It's very important to them, but the Cardassians don't have the treaty with Bajor that they do with the Federation. So look out. So later on the promenade, the guy who I will not mention his follicle choices, who was wearing the Federation uniform before, talks to a Vulcan who tells him to keep his head down until a ship arrives.
Not just any Vulcan, Keith. I'm going to say it. I'm going to put it on the internet, and I don't care. Maybe the hottest Vulcan I've ever seen.
Oh yeah. Well, and she's supposed to be.
Yeah.
In some of the other trivia, her original costume was too
hot to handle, right? It
was too hot to handle, and they toned it down. But yes, the hotness of said Vulcan is well established. So he said, but she tells him, keep your head down. And it turns out they're watched by two aliens with bowls on their head, which is a very, like, it's a big shot that looks very important, but it is not paid off in any way, shape, or form.
And they even do like a really big, terribly directed.
And we saw them.
But I was going to ask you that. That's a no. What?
No idea. No idea.
I thought for sure they would be two of the people we see later after the kidnapping and such, but no.
I forget, like maybe it pays off in the second part. I don't remember, but I don't. That was weird. It was weird and feels like a completely dropped thread. Maybe it's not. We have to wait.
Well,
we have to
Maybe
wait
they came
until
out
we
of the makeup trailer from extras, and the director was just like, "Yo, they look great. Put them in a shot." Although, do they?
Or maybe they won a contest to be on Deep Space Nine and had to get a featured thing. Anyway,
that stuff happened, especially in the 90s.
Oh, it sure did. It happened on Deep Space Nine. Absolutely. So we go and see Quark counting his latinum when said Vulcan lady comes up and proposes a business deal with Quark. Her name is Sikona, and naturally Quark hits on her immediately with 300-year-old Vulcan port, which leads me to ask the question. I'm sure it's been addressed in canon somewhere, but Vulcans make alcohol? It seems odd to me that Vulcans would make alcohol, as it would have deleterious effects that would be illogical. And I remember there was a running gag on Enterprise when T'Pol had alcohol for the first time and was completely obliterated.
You know, what I like about this scene, this whole plot through line actually, is that it raises a couple questions for me and or clarifies Clark further, or makes him more interesting because
Quark.
Because Keith, don't ever joke with me when I'm trying to make a salient point, okay?
It's so hard to tell.
Yeah. So you would think that potentially flirting with a potential huge new business client could jeopardize or turn off said business client. So why would you, if you're a Ferengi, and if what we've learned about Ferengis is business always first, why would you even jeopardize that? So either he believes that his flirting is actually beneficial to said business arrangement, or Quark further proves himself to be a little further from the Ferengi central principles than normal. Like his libido here, but I guess we learned about Ferengis too. Their libido is pretty strong.
Oh yeah. Well, I think it's both, and I think there's a third element of it, that it's a Vulcan. I'm assuming he's thinking there's no business deal here that's going to be interesting or profitable to me, because he's probably just want to send some crackers out at a 3% margin to some orphans or whatever. And I don't give a crap.
That's
so
fair.
Let me try it. And she's hot. Let's go there. So I bet that's probably a little bit. I think that's
okay.
it.
I like that.
Wait.
I like that.
Oh wait, the bullheads do pay off. I totally forgot.
Okay.
We both forgot. So
Keith, I'm so triggered by recent things that when you go, oh wait, I was like, oh no, what happened? What did we? What wasn't recording?
Right. Sikona wants to discuss their plan privately.
She's so good. She's so good in this episode. I think she's excellent.
And then Quark spins it into a dinner date. And then here's where we literally both forgot. I can't believe the last line of Act 1 is, then the bald guy is abducted by the bullheads.
Oh, they were the undercover kidnappers.
Right. There it is. We blew that. I can't believe we both just completely forgot that they were the ones who abducted the bald, the bald. I mean the follically challenged fellow. So in Act 2, Sisko arrives at home to discover Gul Dukat sitting in his quarters. That's a power move if I've ever seen one.
You left the key at my apartment last time you swung by, Ben.
Yeah, well, I had to go pick up his toothbrush. So Sisko is immediately worried that Dukat might have done something to Jake. And Dukat, of course, is wounded by this, but just wants to speak privately. Dukat explains that he got onto the station without anyone knowing and got into Sisko's quarters. And to this I say, Odo, dude. I know you're hamstrung. We're going to talk about it, but dude, that's not good.
I mean, they do their best. They stretch the thinnest of threads to be he's like, well, this used to be my station, used to be my bedroom, so I know the back corridors. So, I mean, that's okay.
Which, no, and I totally believe that. And Dukat is somebody with the wherewithal to do that. Nonetheless, like that's probably not a good thing for your station
But
security.
he's clearly doing it without not just the Deep Space Nine knowing or the Starfleet in any way, but also basically what we learned,
Anybody else?
Cardassian command, right? Like this is clearly I want to check up on some things.
Yeah. So I mean, Dukat is nothing if not resourceful. And while the station security might not be great, the lighting continues to be awesome.
Mhm.
Dukat says, you guys have a problem with the ship that blew up, and I'm here secretly to tell you what's going on. And he says it's members of the Federation who blew up the ship, and he's come to convince Sisko to clean it up so the Cardassians don't have to, and thus jeopardize the treaty. And he says, let's hop in a runabout and head to the demilitarized zone. And okay, so like we have some intrigue going on here. We got some problems happening. So later in the runabout, and Sisko's like, yeah, sure. Later in the runabout, which this would have been better informed if we'd had that scene with the admirals.
Yeah.
To put some pressure on Sisko here to like take matters into his own hands. Anyway, so later on the runabout, Dukat complains about his controls not being on.
And this is that whole scene. Basically, this is like when you're sitting next to somebody and like they look over you and you're like, don't look at my iPhone password. And you're like, I'm not. And then you're like, you memorized it.
Yeah, exactly. What? Never give me a password.
Yeah.
I don't remember anybody's names, but passwords stay with me. I think I might be Cardassian. But we also find out that Cardassians have photographic memory.
Yeah, that was cool.
Super cool. But apparently not as cool when you find out that they force kids to learn it at 4. But it's a great little wrinkle, right? To know they have photographic memories, which is like a little superpower you didn't know they had, and also reinforces the sort of like bleakness of Cardassian existence. That this is something they force you to learn. But Dukat justifies it by saying education is power, joy is vulnerability.
And I like what I like about Ben here is that, look, we know this isn't a new idea, right? Like, look at some of the human rights violations from China and some of the other things that we kind of just like we know about. We see people complain about, but we're like, yeah, but like my stuff is cheap, like we just kind of. So yes, Ben is on this mission, and they are supposed to be like completely open to everybody's different cultures, but it doesn't mean he don't have opinions, and I like that.
Yeah, and it's tough with the Cardassians too, because it's not just some random culture you stumbled across. They were in a bloody, horrible war against each other recently.
The thing I love about Dukat's performance always is that, yeah, we know he's full of BS, but he also knows that Ben knows. And so there's this fun he has with it, even when he's being sincere, he knows that that's his sincerity is being questioned, and he enjoys it. And that there's something very fun about that, which makes these scenes specifically really great. Quark does a similar thing, but Dukat really, I'm not Quark. Garrick.
Well, Garrick enjoys playing with like flat lies, whereas Dukat enjoys playing with lies of sincerity.
Yeah.
By like pretending to be sincere when
emotional
he's not.
Deceit.
But with Dukat, you wonder, is there actual sincerity beneath his false sincerity?
In this episode, for sure, I think. I mean, at least that's where I sit on the fence right now. Like, and it's cool that they use both these guys, because when they start to, in this scene specifically, learn that some of the people, their underlings, if you will, are going rogue unilaterally, they both have the exact same response as you would expect a leader to do. So it's kind of cool.
Yeah, and
in fact, Ben's the one who's late to the party here, which is an interesting writing choice.
Yeah, it's interesting. And Dukat here, with all of what we're talking about, says, "I want to get to know you, Ben. I want to be friends." And
you're an honorable man.
This is where we get so many different layers of sincerity. He's saying that but we don't think he's sincere. But is he faking being insincere? Does he actually want to be friends, but pretending like he doesn't? Like, Mike, dude, I just want to be friends with you, Mike. Yeah, I want you to be my buddy. Yeah. So then they get a distress signal from a Federation merchant vessel being attacked by 2 Cardassian ships.
And we get to watch an Atari 2600 game take place.
We sure do. That's so much cheaper. But they're being attacked by Cardassian ships, even though they're in the demilitarized zone. And turns out the Cardassian ships are only shuttles, but they're armed. So Dukat figures that they must be from the colonies in the demilitarized zone.
That was my favorite line of this scene. There's so many good ones. It's a good scene. When he comes over to the panel and Ben looks at him and he just says, "You think I didn't study this thing front and back before I got on the ship with you? Come on."
Oh, yeah,
Awesome.
yeah. It's all over it. It's very sort of Cold War. And Dukat tries to call the attacking shuttles to tell them to stop the attack, but they don't answer. Even though Dukat gives his verification code. Thank you, Mike. Dukat says he'll fire torpedoes from the runabout to stop them. And apparently Sisko's like, yeah, sure, fire torpedoes from my Federation ship. Whatever, why not? And of course, as you mentioned, Dukat already knows the controls, but before he does, another Federation ship shows up.
Mhm.
It's not Starfleet, but it is a modified civilian ship, and it blows up the 2 Cardassian ships. So we have basically 2 sets of armed civilian ships shooting at each other, blowing each other up. And we find out that the Federation and Cardassian settlers are fighting amongst themselves. Which brings us to Act 3. And Quark has pulled out all the stops for his date with the hot Vulcan lady. And she's up for some of it. She'll drink the wine, but she won't dance. He explains the
I won't
rules
dance. You can't make
Don't
me.
ask me. No, dance. Don't ask me.
Oh, but there's wine? Yeah, maybe I'll dance.
I'll drink.
I guess we'll see.
She's way up for it. It's very strange. He explains the rules of acquisition.
Well, if you
and-
want to get a good price, if you want to get a good price, all right,
for your arms.
and you got to bang some Ferengi, that's logical.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. Yeah, she's playing it. Little James Bond.
That's straight Vulcan, baby.
No, fair enough. But Quark explains the rules of acquisition, which she says she's reassured by this for
Is this
some
the
reason.
first time we've got a specific number, 286?
I think we might have mentioned it before, but it keeps growing.
Yeah.
Because they keep coming up with more important things. But she says, like, oh, I'm reassured by this. Either she's terribly naive and never met a Ferengi, or it's a lie to try to, it's a negotiation tactic. But like, no sane person should be reassured by the
Right.
Ferengi rules of acquisition. Then she shocks Quark by drinking her wine in one swig. And this is when she drops, she wants to buy an extensive list of weapons. So, yeah, there we go. She's not your typical Vulcan, that's for damn sure. We see an interesting blended matte painting and live action establishing shot of a Federation colony in the demilitarized zone as Mike goes through 10 trillion photographs because the Vulcan lady was hot.
Quark's feeling the way I was feeling.
This was Mike on the little hot under the ears, hot under the lobes. Anyway, moving on from that, here's our shot of the colony here, which is a cool. Yes, we get it, Mike. She's attractive. So we have the live action shot blended in to the matte painting here, which is pretty cool.
It's so cool. They're going to use it about 3 more times.
Yeah, well, you realize how much work that was.
Mhm.
That's a lot of work to make that happen.
I don't know that the scale works particularly well, but
No, it doesn't make any sense
yeah,
at
they're
all.
way
And
too big.
and it's very clearly a painting.
Anyway,
And but whatever. It's interesting. That's just like just how we did stuff like this back in the 90s versus how we would do it today. So, but we know this is a Federation colony in the demilitarized zone. And we arrive, and a contentious meeting is taking place between the settlers and the Cardassians.
And Rez.
Yeah, and media res. Hudson is there with his counterpart from the Cardassian colonies, Gul Evek, who we met earlier. Sisko and Dukat arrive and ask why nobody answered either of them during the attack.
I've been calling you all day, honey. My phone wasn't on. I've been calling you all day.
And honey was murdering people. You know, I was too busy shooting
in our
stuff.
car.
I was doing pew pew. So
in a station wagon?
See, in the station, yeah, exactly. That they put a
bazooka in
a bazooka on the station wagon. That's but that's kind of exactly what it is.
Yeah, 100%.
Evek then pulls out a confession from the Federation dude who blew up the ship. And that dude was one of the Federation settlers who says he's been there for 20 years. They plug in a USB drive and play the hostage video / confession.
First, everybody holds the USB drive for some reason.
It's pretty exciting. I mean, this was long before actual USB drives doing this. And the best thing about this video is that it finishes with static, because in 1994 we could envision video files that can fit onto thumb drives that you can just plug in, but we couldn't conceive that there wouldn't still be static at the end of a video.
That's true.
On the VHS, which is very funny to me.
It is funny.
Then they bring in the body and says that he committed suicide in custody, and cue the awkward Star Trek fighting.
I wish I got a screenshot. I tried to get the guy, him flying. There's a one shot where he's just like totally horizontal. It's very funny.
Yeah, so the guy lunges over the table and tries to attack. And we see here...
Sorry.
Yeah.
Do we know if that guy... Because all we ever saw him really do was talk to the Vulcan. So he was like... I thought he was bartering the sort of arms exchange. Do we know that he planted that bomb?
He was the guy wearing the Federation uniform.
Yeah, I know. But we never saw in the beginning. We just see that he clearly he was on a mission there, but we don't know that he was the guy who did the bombing necessarily.
I inferred it was obviously him, because he opens up a panel on the ship itself right before it leaves. He's beeping. Oh,
you're right. You're right.
Ship.
I forgot the beep and boop.
Yeah, he was beeping and booping. He clearly set the bomb.
Wow, this shot looks familiar.
Yeah. But before we go, I'd like to point out that in the aftermath of this, we see Bernie Casey is huge compared to the guy who jumped over the table. And I looked it up. Bernie Casey's 6'4", but the guy who lunged over the table is absolutely tiny. And the other thing about
why is it? What is that costuming? I guess that's just they're whatever they wear on the planet, on the outcrops.
No, that's specifically he's a Native American.
Oh, okay.
And so we're going to learn subsequently on Next Gen and this, that because we're trying to draw the parallels or whatever, that there's a lot of Native American colonies in these colonies in the DMZ, drawing the parallel to being, sort of more being more people being displaced and moved around by treaties they had nothing to do with. I think that's sort of the parallel they're trying to do. They make it much more understandable later than in this episode. But that's part of what's happening here. But the little guy who jumped over the table and attacked him, go back and watch this scene, because if you wanted to see some just like awkward,
it's not great.
It's bad.
This guy, right?
Yeah, that guy. So he leaps over the table. He's tiny, and despite literally attempting murder 4 seconds previously, he has the presence of mind. So he leaps back, and he's still grimacing awkwardly, but he still has the presence of mind to fix his vest while holding that weird face.
Gotta look good, baby.
It was not the shining moment of that.
That was his big scene. He told everybody, he's like, "Oh, wait, you see, I have this great action scene."
He's like, "Hey, I'm gonna fuck you," and he's like,
He's been going to the gym for like 2 weeks, and he's like, "You got 6 packs, baby." You lift, bro? He lifts, bro.
He apparently. Anyway, Act 4. Go back and watch it. It'll make sense. So, still on the colony, Hudson and Sisko argue about the settlers. And when the treaty happened, the Federation wanted them to leave, but the colonists didn't want to. So the deal was they agreed to let the colonists remain on the planets in what is now Cardassian space. But Hudson says the Cardassians aren't going to allow that and accuses them of random acts of violence and harassment of the settlers who remained. Sisko says, let the Federation work on it with the Cardassians. And Hudson says the Cardassians are arming the settlers, the Cardassian settlers, in the DMZ. So this is where we sort of get to the crux of the world building here. And I'm wondering why the settlers moved to those places in the first place when it was like right on the border of an adversary we were actively or about to be actively at war with.
Yeah, it makes more sense if they had been there previously and they didn't want to leave, but it sounds like they chose there.
Well, they chose there, but they said the guy had been there for 20 years. I don't know how long the Cardassian War went on.
Right.
This whole thing sort of lives and dies on our belief that the Cardassian government, despite making the treaty saying it's okay to have these people stay there, we're going to try to push them out through nefarious means,
right,
and sort of arm the settlers. If all of this could have been solved if the Cardassians, when they did the treaty, said like, no, you can't leave your people here.
Yeah.
Because like, why wouldn't, it doesn't all quite click in. But Hudson's like, the Cardassians are arming the Cardassian folks and harassing them. Sisko is reminded of the fact that the Cardassians are doing something similar, or that they did something similar on Bajor. And they speculate that the ship that was blown up might have been part of the illegal weapons shipping. So, like we did from the Circle trilogy, we know the Cardassian government was secretly arming to destabilize the Bajoran people. So he's saying that the ship that blew up was probably bringing arms to the Cardassian settlers in the DMZ.
I gotta say though, if their general terrorist plan here is to be getting illegal arms through a third party, a Vulcan smuggler, that is some prime planning, because you don't usually sniff out the Vulcans as terrorist arm dealers.
No.
So like, that's a great hookup if they got it. And then Quark clearly doesn't give two shits. So
no, he 1,000,000% doesn't. Like, what the what?
Well, see, it was before like Quark had some, like he was doing some funny business, but illegally supplying arms to a rogue,
a full-on arms dealer.
Yeah, that seems a little bit outside of his league. But I guess we underestimated our little buddy.
So's the Vulcan. So yeah. I think that's
the Vulcan isn't a major fun comedic character on our show.
Yeah, well, yeah. All right. So Sisko and Dukat head back to the station, and Sisko is pissed that they killed the guy. The Cardassians killed the guy and pretended it was a suicide, which they obviously did. Mm-hmm. Dukat said, "I am too, but only because it was sloppy and a waste. We could have used him more before we killed him." We also learned that apparently 78 people died when the ship exploded.
Yeah.
Oof. Dukat denies, of course, that the ship was carrying any weapons. We also learned, just sort of randomly, that Dukat has 7 children, which is an interesting wrinkle we didn't know. Back on the station, the Vulcan lady and Quark apparently have made an arms deal, and the Vulcan needs it faster, and he's got a book. But she does seem kind of into him.
Yeah, she's like, I can't bang you now, but maybe later.
Maybe later. I don't know, maybe. Quark's got game, man. Quark has got game.
That I think we can all agree on.
Oh, and so here's where you can see his wardrobe malfunction there. Sisko and Dukat arrive back at the station, and it's
Wait,
it's
explain it to
crazy.
me again.
So you see how his left side is tucked in, and his right side it's sort of flapping out in front there.
Yeah.
That's supposed to be tied back.
Interesting.
So it's supposed to be armor and not rubber, and it's very obviously rubber when it's not tied down. It's crazy they didn't catch that, but I think like that walk and talk was very elaborate. There's a ton of extras and moving pieces, and maybe they just figured it wasn't
Yeah, you
worth
forget how
resetting for.
how hamstrung for time they are. Remember that whole like special effect they had to do with Odo, and he was dizzy one day, so they're like, we can't do it. We got to just like fake it and post.
Yeah, it's crazy. So Sisko shows up on Ops and talks with O'Brien. It was indeed a Federation bomb. We knew that. Kira then goes to talk to Sisko. She asks if there's a war, if a war is possible. Sisko is pissed, and so is Kira, because she is on the colonist side, and Sisko is not. Which is understandable from her point of view.
Well, that is the part about the episode that, like, in huge broad strokes, it's all point of view, right? You've got the two commanders who are basically looking at things bird's eye view, right? They're tactical, and they're looking at, and she clearly, and all of the colonists clearly, are much more zoomed in and have their stakes are much more specific, whereas the stakes are more grand, and how those differences in wartime / political times or lenses can differ.
Yeah, and I think what's missing in this storytelling to make us be more on the side of these colonists is seeing an attempt from them to expose what the Cardassians are doing to the Federation so the Federation can intervene before they kill 78 people. If they tried, like, here's proof, they're doing this to us, you've got to protect us, and the Federation's like, then I totally understand where they're going and doing sort of these terrorist attacks and fighting back. But without that sort of piece in the middle, because the Federation has an investment in protecting them. Now, they're not in Federation territory anymore, and that's part of what the treaty is. So the Cardassians are the authorities in that situation, but they're still Federation citizens, and the Federation still gives a crap about what happens to them. So I think it's just missing that piece. Anyway, later, the Vulcan and a Federation security guard go and abduct Dukat out of his quarters.
Sorry, I was talking. Okay, here we go.
So they abduct him out of the quarter. They have another. Yeah, they zap that guy, and it's the little guy with the vest, and he's there, and they're trying to abduct Dukat. He tries to fight, but then they shoot him and take him away. Yeah, there he is. There's like, oh, do you see my vest? It's beautiful.
So the Vulcan arms dealer is actually supplying arms to the Federation colonists. That's right.
So
So on the ship, they were talking about potentially the Cardassian, or no, not on the ship. They were speculating that the Cardassians were getting arms through a third party. So it only makes sense that clearly the colonists are as well.
So both sides are trying to arm themselves
without letting either high command know what's happening on the planet.
Right. Yeah. They're both sneaking around arming themselves.
Yeah. Putting a bazooka on the station wagon. That's right. So Act 5 begins with Sisko arguing with Starfleet while the rest of the cast watch from the other side of the door. And this is the scene that we didn't get. Odo says, it's the Federation's fault because they won't let me Patriot Act the station. And that's, so we're seeing the rebuttal to what the Admiral was saying in the scene that got cut. They make a plan to try to find Dukat, and they figure out which ship is taking Dukat back to the DMZ. So they figure out blah, 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 the ship manifests, these two ships left, blah, blah, blah. They figure out what it is. Doctor, you come with me? Okay.
Yeah, sure, send the doctor, why not? They then get a message from a group taking responsibility for abducting Dukat. They call themselves dun dun dun
the Maquis.
The Maquis. The Maquis.
Being told it's the Maquis.
The Maquis, yes, from the control room. So Sisko, Bashir, and Kira zoom on in pursuit on a runabout. They're going to the Badlands, a weird part of space where ships go missing. The Bermuda Triangle of this area. Sisko says, we're going to get Dukat back by any means necessary, because we're friends now.
And she says, even if we got to blow up some of our own?
Yep. So they find an M-class asteroid with that the ship has landed on. They beam down onto a very backlot-looking backlot set. And then out of the fog and the mist comes, dun, 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 again, Hudson, who is now clearly leading the Maquis. And
in a shocking twist that was a shock to literally no one on the planet.
Literally nobody. Here out of the dry ice fog comes, which that set is not good. You couldn't have found an actual location to do that on. Anyway, and that is our to be continued before we talk about Maquis Part 2. But before we hand out some self-sealing stem bolts, it is time for Mike's vocab quiz. And now it's time for Mike and Deglio's Star Trek vocabulary quiz. Okay, Mike. What is Mercassium?
That's a thing that is in the thing. Forget it. It's the beginning of the episode. It was early.
We were looking for a synthetic composite used in shield generation by the Federation.
That was tip of my tongue.
Tip of your tongue. And next up, Mike, what is an M-class asteroid?
Oh, that's an asteroid that's big enough for you to actually, like, inhabit.
But M-class, meaning it has oxygen and nitrogen environment.
Clearly, which
so
you would need.
Breathe on it.
You would need to inhabit, yeah.
Yeah. Well, there it is. I'm curious what, and like a real science person explains to me, what is the difference between a planet and an asteroid if the asteroid has a atmosphere? In that sense, is it because it's not part of a solar system?
Neil deGrasse.
Well, wouldn't that be a rogue planet, not an asteroid?
Keith, don't ask questions you don't want answers to, because we're about to get them in the comments. Go ahead, tell us. Let us know.
Indeed. And also, like, how does the asteroid have an M-class environment if it's not orbiting a sun?
I don't know, man. These
or
are
a
all
star
good
of some
questions.
sort.
I thought this was my quiz, not. Yeah.
I know. I'm asking for answers.
All right.
All right. But before, I think it's time to come along home. What do you say?
Oh, but hold on.
Oh, God, we're already here. The call was coming from within the... Okay, here we are at Quarks, and I'm drinking from my Quarks bar mug. Oh, there it is. There it is. Let's tip one back, chase around some sexy Vulcans, and answer the question, Mike, were there any wormholes in the plot?
Oh God. For the most part, yeah. But I can't. I guess just like the wormhole for me is more esoteric. It's like, what is the viewpoint I'm supposed to have? So that's it's so I'm not sure that they laid the stakes out properly. So I don't know that that's a wormhole so much, but I think it's that first scene with Ben and the other guy that they don't bullet point it for me. You know what I mean? I think the wormhole is that there's too many worms. And not enough holes.
Not enough hole. Yeah. Too many worms. Just like a bolus of worms and there's no hole for them to go in.
Do you have anything more specific, Keith? Because what I just said was word soup.
It's like a Gordian knot of worms. Okay. Yeah, I think you're right. I think that there weren't necessarily any like wormholes in the plot laid out in the structure of the episode. But I think what are everybody's motivations here of the Maquis seem much more clear to the characters on the show than it does to the audience watching. And it's almost like and I've always felt this about the Maquis in general, which is a big part of Voyager, and we tee it up on Next Gen, and they teed up a little better on Next Gen than they do here in this episode, and we're gonna get into it a lot more, because it is sort of an important part of all of this. But the changing of the border and the colonists of each side being on various sides, and why are they, it's all a little muddy, and it's a little bit murky, and it doesn't need to be.
Right.
The story they're trying to tell is there are these people who got screwed over by a treaty and are being overlooked by the Federation and exploited by the Cardassians, so they're having to fight to protect themselves, trying to make some sort of an analogy with the Bajoran resistance that Kira was a part of. They're calling themselves the Maquis, in reference to the French resistance in World War II. But I don't think it's the parallel they're trying to make by calling themselves the Maquis. It's not quite the same thing. They weren't taken over by the Nazis. The territory changed hands, and they chose to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I understand being forced out of your home because of a treaty that you had no control over. That I'm with you, 100%. I'm pissed by that. I can't believe Federation gave up this territory. But whose territory is it now? Because it's in the DMZ, so it's not. It is technically Cardassian territory, but it's not full regular Cardassian territory. It's all just muddy to me, and maybe somebody smarter can explain that whole deal.
I agree, but this is a 45-minute television episode. It's not interesting enough for all of the nuance that they're trying to layer in, or for the blurring. It just give me the bullet points. We don't know
any of these people.
Yeah, just give me the bullet points.
I think that's part of it. If they'd found a way to make it a character that we know and care about and have a relationship with and see it through their eyes. I mean, they told this story a million times better with Kira pushing the guy off the moon, because they in imminent domain took him off. I felt so much more invested and cared so much more about his plight than I do these people.
So speaking of the confusion, because this is still all right, I thought once I read the thing about Voyager that Voyager was about these settlers, and I was like, oh, they have to clearly then set up the stakes for the settlers, because that's what Voyager's about. But that's not what Voyager's about, right?
Well, I mean, I guess I'm going to be giving away the pilot of Voyager to you, but it's not all right. It's not really that much of a. What happens is that Voyager, the Federation ship, is chasing a Maquis ship through the Badlands. Then something happens that puts them on the other side of the entire universe, 80 years away.
Oh.
And so the two ships decide to combine forces. So that the cast, all the people on the Voyager ship are made of half Federation officers and half Maquis members. And so that sort of sets up the initial tension of the show. You have you have the straight-laced Federation folk, and then these sort of bandits, and some of the bandits used to be in the Federation and left to join the Maquis. And so that's sort of the setup for it.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, there's something there that it didn't really end up being that interesting, but it was sort of the setup for it. There's an episode of Next Gen which makes this as a much better explanation of where they're coming from in the episode of Next Gen, where they go, it's specifically an indigenous American community on one of these places, and they're like, we have been pushed off our land 1 trillion times. You can't again. And that I'm like, okay, now I understand where you're coming from. But with these sort of nameless, faceless, kind of boring Maquis dudes who don't look particularly scary or particularly interesting, and yeah, it's just muddy, and it's asking me to care a lot at the end of this episode. It's asking me to be very invested in the outcome of all of this, and at this point, I don't know if I care.
Yeah, I'm feeling similarly. So let's move on. Let's
yeah.
talk about our favorite moment.
Best moment.
For me,
Best
it's the scene with.
We all know what your favorite moment is.
No, it's surprisingly no. It's Sisko and Dukat in the runabout, because
Yeah.
I learned more about both of them as characters in that scene than really I learned anything about anything else in the whole show. And what I like, it's not a shocker, but what I like about that is that they use two great performances and the stakes and the situation to show us a lot of their similarities, which in two people who are clearly set up to be antagonistic, an antagonistic relationship, when the more you learn how they're similar, makes it all the more juicy when they go head to head. So I thought this was a great buddy cop, as Keith and I have come to term these type of episodes, and I was a fan of it.
Yeah. I'm gonna agree with you, and I'm just gonna pick the initial scene where Dukat shows up in his quarters, and Sisko's like, "Oh, you've abducted Jake," and he's like, "I'm wounded by that." I just liked the menace of it, mixed with the woundedness that you would think I would do something bad, and it reinforces, like, Dukat's got some game.
Yeah,
that he's able to get in there and play that. I thought that was interesting.
And it also, it gives. We get this with some other characters, but Dukat is usually sort of we see him as the big leader, the big bad of the Cardassians, if you want to lay it that way. And I like that.
He's not.
I know, but
yeah.
He's often carries that weight. I like that in this episode specifically, we see him as very shrewd, very tactical, very even-keeled, prepared, and you almost can't argue against almost any of his thoughts, ideas, or motivations in this episode.
Yeah, there's some logic to it.
So
yeah,
I love that.
He has internal logic in this episode, and he proves, I think, 3 separate times he's a step ahead.
Yeah.
Right. He proves it by getting into the quarters. He proves it by knowing what's happening with these colonies ahead of time. He proves it by knowing the instruments.
And it's about time, right? We're almost done the second season. We finally get Dukat in a whole episode doing his thing.
Yeah. So yeah, it's interesting. Dukat's a very interesting character. All right. So let's do some stem bolts. What do you say?
I'm gonna keep it pretty brief here. I'm a hard meh on the episode. I felt it's hard to recoup from such a muddied opening. It's really hard. I do think things do pick up in the final act. I like the kidnapping sequence. I like that all of the cool stuff they did with the Vulcan, that she comes in and she's part of that team. And I think the setup, even though the setup with Ben's friend in the beginning kind of stunk, where it's going is interesting. That conflict is interesting. Those stakes are interesting. So as a setup, yeah, okay. I like where the cards are. I'm excited for the second episode, but this episode was fairly boring for me all the way through. The stuff I liked, I'll say, is the Quark and the Vulcan tete-a-tete. I think it was very well done. I thought Ben and Dukat buddy cop was excellent all the way through. But I guess the viewpoint of the show that didn't quite work for me is that it's focused so much on the two leaders, the zoomed out view, so the tactical view. But in doing so, it almost cast off the specific stakes and intrigue of the actual conflict taking place on the ground. Almost to the point where it doesn't matter. They're just fighting amongst themselves and it doesn't matter. It's not important. But it is important. It should be. I feel like it should be, especially if the whole next episode is going to be about that. But it seems like that fight is in the background. And right here, the plot we're focusing on is the kidnapping and the zoom out. And so that imbalance makes the stakes muddy for me. And so, hopefully it was a good setup for Voyager, because I feel like that maybe it'll be more, it's more beneficial in that way. Because as a standalone episode, it's tough to rank. I'm giving it 71 stem bolts. 68 stem bolts.
Yeah, you're right about all of that. And I think that the two things this episode fumbles are, like you said, stakes and motivations. Right? I'm not sure what the stakes are, and I'm not really clear what the motivations are for any of it, because there are 4 separate factors here, right? You have the Federation colonists, you have the Cardassian colonists, then you have Cardassia.
Hi.
Oh,
what's up, everybody?
Mike just beamed into nothingness.
Why does that keep happening?
What are you doing, buddy?
Okay, I think we're back.
Stop hitting buttons.
I think I said a hotkey. I didn't mean to say.
Yeah. So you have the 2 sets of colonists, and then you have the 2 governments, the Federations and the Cardassians. And the stakes for all 4 of those aren't really that clear. The clearest are for the Federation colonists, that either the Cardassian government or the Cardassian colonists, or those 2 in collusion, are trying to push them off the land for some reason that I don't know why. Right? There's where we're missing the motivations. Why are they trying to push them off there?
100%.
Why do they care? Do they have resources? Do they want the space? What is it? I don't know. And there's also, we're not reinforcing the stakes for the governments. All right. So why? I mean, we get it. There's a treaty, there's a war, but we don't really set up man, if this fails, they might be at war with each other again. So this is really important. And that's sort of implied, but not really set up. So it's not at the foreground. I don't really know why it's that big of a deal.
Yeah,
for any of these
Kira
people.
almost has that scene where she's like, does this mean we're going to have war? But that's kind of tossed aside too. It's
the fragility of the stability is not set up well here. That's a story they're telling. That these colonies battling with each other might start an intergalactic war. Okay, that means I feel the stakes are high there, but it's not set up that well. And I don't have anybody to root for. The Maquis here. Yeah, I sympathize with your situation, but I don't know who you are. We haven't met any of you. You're just a bunch of nameless people in earth tone vests. That's basically all I know is that they really love a dark purple vest. And that. Okay, so what else? Why are you here? Why do you want to be here so much? What is your motivation? What are your stakes? It's all muddy. So therefore, I end the same place you do. I don't know if I care about any of this.
Yeah, just tough. Especially going into a whole nother hour.
when you're trying so hard to make this important, everything in this episode is in italics. This is important. This is important. We're setting up an entire series out of this, and we're setting this up on 2 other series to do this, and I don't care yet. And I think that is where they have some heavy lifting to do, which we're going to find out whether they do that in the Maquis Part 2. But I'm going to give this 74 self-sealing stem bolts. I didn't hate it as much as you did, mainly because of the Dukat of it all. I think Dukat rescues this episode. But we'll have to see how this all pans out next week in the Maquis Part 2. So while you're waiting for that to happen, you can check out our other shows. Look at my Star Trek Toys, K&M Geekly, and the sporadic episodes of Keith and Mike Play Star Trek The Final Unity, all here on the YouTubes. If you're listening to this on the audio-only podcast, do us a favor. Leave us a rating and review on whatever podcasting service you have there. It'll help other people find our nonsense. And if you found our nonsense and you're like, boy, I would like to give those fools money, you can do so at patreon.com/KNM, spell out that and get even more of our nonsense. So, Mike, that's it. Part 2 next week. We're all on breath. I don't know if it's bated breath, but we're all on breath.
Which is good.
Part
Which is
2.
good step 1.
keep breathing. We will see you back here next week with another episode of Keith and Mike Watch Deep Space Nine. Thank you for watching K&M Entertainment. If you enjoyed our particular brand of nonsense, please like and subscribe. Or become one of our patrons at patreon.com/KNM.